Lucy Rivers wasn't the type of woman who usually got caught up in drama. She ran her cozy little bakery, Sweet Cravings, on the quietest corner of town, where everyone came for cinnamon rolls and gossip. It was the perfect setup for a girl who wanted to live a simple life, bake, and avoid trouble. But trouble had a way of finding her anyway. "Mommy, why does that man have a grumpy face?" piped up the sweet voice of her 3-year-old son, Max, who was sitting at the counter with a cookie too big for his tiny hands. Lucy froze, her eyes snapping to the man in question. Oh no. No, no, no. Of all the people to walk into her bakery today, it had to be him. Detective Nate Cole. He hadn't changed much in 3 years. The dark leather jacket, the hint of stubble that gave him a perpetual bad boy look, and those stormy gray eyes that always seemed to see right through her. Back in the day, he'd been the town's resident troublemaker, turning heads with his smirks and speeding tickets. Then he shocked everyone by becoming a cop, and an insanely good one at that. Lucy's stomach did a nervous flip as Nate stepped closer to the counter, his sharp gaze landing on her. For a second, she saw his brows lift, and that ever-present smirk tugged at his lips. "Lucy Rivers," he drawled, his voice low and teasing. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd still be living the quiet life out of town." Lucy forced a smile, gripping her spatula like it was a weapon. "Things change, Detective Cole. Welcome to my bakery." He glanced at Max, who was now smearing chocolate on his face. "And who's this little guy?" Lucy's stomach plummeted. This was the moment she dreaded. Max's big green eyes, Nate's exact shade of green, were as unmistakable as the dimple in his cheek when he grinned. She knew Nate was perceptive, so she tried to play it cool. "This is Max. My son," she said lightly, sliding a plate of cookies between them as a distraction. "Want a cookie?" "On the house." Nate tilted his head, his smirk fading as he studied Max. His gaze flicked back to Lucy, and something sharp and calculating filled his eyes. "Thanks," he said slowly, reaching for a cookie. But he didn't eat it. "Cute kid. Looks a lot like me," Lucy interrupted, laughing a little too loudly. "I know, right? He's got my eyes and my, dimples." Nate didn't look convinced. In fact, he looked downright suspicious. The rest of the day dragged on in awkward silence. Lucy couldn't shake the feeling of Nate's gaze burning into her as he sat at a corner table, nursing a cup of coffee like he was solving a case. When he finally left, Max had fallen asleep on a pile of flour sacks in the back, and Lucy let out a long breath. For 3 years, she'd kept her secret. Max had been born a few months after her one and only night with Nate, and she'd decided not to tell him. Back then, Nate had been too wrapped up in his dangerous cases and reckless life, and Lucy hadn't wanted to complicate things. But now, she wasn't so sure she could keep it up. The next morning, Nate was back. This time, he brought backup, his partner, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Ramirez. "Morning, Lucy," Nate greeted with a grin that was entirely too smug. "Busy day?" Lucy narrowed her eyes. "Not busy enough to deal with whatever you're up to." Ramirez chuckled under her breath, but Nate just smiled wider. "Relax, I'm here for the pastries. I hear you make the best cinnamon rolls in town." Lucy turned to grab a tray of fresh rolls, trying to ignore the way his presence made her pulse race. "Here. Take them and go." But Nate wasn't going anywhere. He nodded toward Max, who was sitting at a nearby table, humming a little song as he played with his toy trucks. "So, Max," Nate said casually. "How old are you?" Lucy froze mid-step. "Nate, don't. I'm 3. Max chirped, holding up 4 fingers. Ramirez snorted into her coffee. Nate raised an eyebrow, his grin turning into something more serious. 3, huh? He said, his eyes locking on Lucy. "Interesting timing, don't you think?" Lucy felt her cheeks heat. "Don't you have a crime scene to investigate or something?" "Oh, I am investigating," Nate said, his voice low and teasing. But there was an edge of curiosity, and something else, beneath it. Over the next week, Nate made it his mission to hang around the bakery as often as possible. Lucy tried to ignore him, but it was impossible when he was always leaning against her counter, cracking jokes, and charming her customers. It didn't help that Max had taken a liking to him. Every time Nate showed up, Max would run over with his trucks or his drawings, and Nate would humor him with surprising patience. One afternoon, as Lucy watched Nate help Max stack sugar packets into a tower, her heart twisted. It was almost too easy to imagine them as a family, laughing and playing together. But she couldn't let herself go there. "Nate," she said, folding her arms. "Why are you here? Really?" He straightened, his expression turning serious for the first time. "Because I've got questions, Lucy. And I think you owe me some answers." Her stomach dropped. She knew this moment was coming, but she wasn't ready. "Look," she began, her voice shaky. "It's not what you think." "Is he mine?" Nate asked, his voice quiet but firm. Lucy swallowed hard, unable to meet his eyes. "Yes." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and unspoken for far too long. Nate let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. "Damn it, Lucy. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were a mess back then," she shot back, her emotions spilling out all at once. "You were chasing bad guys and putting your life on the line every day. I didn't think you were ready to be a father, and I wasn't going to force it on you." Nate stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. "You're right," he said. "I wasn't ready. But I am now." Lucy blinked. "What?" "I want to be in his life," Nate said, his voice steady and sure. "I'm not walking away from this, Lucy. Not again." Her heart twisted again, but this time, it was with a strange mix of fear and hope. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she also couldn't deny the way Max lit up every time Nate walked through the door. "Okay," she said softly. "But don't make promises you can't keep, Nate." He smiled then, and for the first time, it wasn't a smirk. It was real and warm and a little vulnerable. "I won't," he promised. Over the next few weeks, Nate made good on his word. He spent more and more time with Max, taking him to the park, helping him build forts out of flour sacks, and even learning how to decorate cupcakes, though he was terrible at it. Lucy couldn't help but admire the way Nate had stepped up. He wasn't just a bad boy with a badge anymore, he was a dad. And, against her better judgment, she found herself falling for him all over again. One evening, after Max had gone to bed, Nate stayed behind to help Lucy clean up the bakery. As they worked side by side, their shoulders brushing, the tension between them grew thick. "You've got flour on your face," Nate said, smirking as he reached out to wipe it away. Lucy rolled her eyes. "Thanks, Mr. Observant." But when she looked up at him, their faces were only inches apart. Her breath hitched as his gaze dropped to her lips. "Lucy," he murmured, his voice low and rough. "I need to know, is there still a chance for us?" Her heart raced. Part of her wanted to say yes, to throw caution to the wind and let herself fall into his arms. But another part of her was scared, scared of getting hurt, scared of what it would mean for Max if things didn't work out. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm willing to try." Nate smiled, and for the first time in years, Lucy felt like she could breathe again. "Good," he said, his hand sliding to the small of her back. "Because I'm not going anywhere." As the months went by, Nate and Lucy found their rhythm. There were still challenges, like Nate accidentally teaching Max how to make siren noises during bedtime, but they faced them together. And for the first time in a long time, Lucy felt like her little family was complete. After all, life wasn't about avoiding trouble. Sometimes, it was about facing it head on, and finding love along the way.